You know what the scariest thing is for a soldier? It's not the whistle of bullets, not the shrapnel, not the sight of blood. The scariest thing is when you're defending your country, and you realize your country needs defending not just from external enemies, but from those who hide behind the backs of your loved ones. My story started with 11 words, but I'm sure those 11 words cost me far more than my life in Afghanistan. My wife, Emily, just signed a death warrant, not for herself, but for me. The Afghan dust, a fine, gritty powder, seemed to coat everything: my skin, my uniform, even the air I breathed. It seeped into your soul, a constant reminder of where you were, what you were doing. For me, Colonel James Peterson, it had been a familiar companion for far too long. 50 years on this earth, 30 of them dedicated to Uncle Sam. Most of that in places where the concept of home felt like a distant, romanticized dream. My current office was a cramped, sandbagged outpost overlooking a desolate stretch of desert. The air conditioning unit was more of a suggestion than a reality, battling valiantly against the relentless heat. But inside, amidst the maps, comms equipment, and the faint scent of stale coffee, I found a different kind of solace. It came in the form of an email from home, a digital lifeline connecting me to the world I was fighting to protect. Emily, my wife, 48 years old, bright, energetic, and the epitome of an army spouse. While I was out here, she was back at Fort Bragg, leading the family support group with an almost ferocious dedication. She understood the life, the sacrifices, the endless deployments. Or so I thought. Her emails used to be a comforting mix of local gossip, updates on our overgrown rose garden, and the mundane details of a life I temporarily put on hold. But over the last few months, a new theme had emerged, dominating her narratives with an almost evangelical fervor. "James, honey, you would not believe the progress we're making with the new program," she'd write, her words practically buzzing with enthusiasm. "Our focus on holistic rehabilitation for our wounded warriors is truly making a difference. And I have a special project, a real challenge, but so rewarding." That challenge, that special project, was Sergeant Troy West. Emily painted a vivid picture of Troy, a young, heroic Marine, barely in his 30s, who had lost a leg to an IED blast. He was, she wrote, so brave, so resilient, but so utterly broken inside. "He needs our help, James. He deserves it. He's a true American hero." ID pour over the accompanying photos she sent. Emily, beaming, arm in arm with a man whose kind eyes and forced yet charming smile belied the raw pain she described. He was handsome, in that boy-next-door way, with a neatly trimmed beard and an easy charisma that even a static image couldn't quite obscure. In one picture, he was demonstrating his new prosthetic, his jaw set in what Emily called a mask of quiet determination. My heart swelled with pride for both of them, for Troy, for his sacrifice, for Emily, for her boundless compassion. She looked genuinely happy, engaged, finding purpose in my absence. It eased a quiet guilt I often carried, knowing my deployments left her with an empty house and a life on hold. My own service, of course, paid no mind to my emotional state. Our current mission, a delicate dance of intelligence gathering and counterinsurgency, was dragging on. Weeks turned into months. The arid landscape blurred into a monotonous cycle of patrols, briefings, and the constant hum of the generator. Fatigue was a permanent fixture, a heavy cloak I wore everywhere. As the days bled into each other, I began to notice a subtle shift in Emily's communications. The emails became slightly less frequent, her calls shorter, more hurried. They still mentioned Troy, often, but the details became vaguer, more focused on the program rather than the specific, heartwarming anecdotes that initially captivated me. "Troy is coming along wonderfully," she'd say, almost as an afterthought. "The group is so inspired by him." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of unease started to snake its way through my thoughts. I dismiss it immediately, of course, attributing it to the stress of command, the gnawing anxiety of being so far from home, the sheer exhaustion that was a constant companion. It was just the usual paranoia of a husband deployed, nothing more. Emily was doing good work. She was busy. That was all. The sandstorm that day was particularly vicious, painting the world in shades of ochre and choking the breath from your lungs. As I stared out from my small window, watching the swirling vortex of dust, a new email from Emily popped up on my screen. This one was unusually short, devoid of her usual cheerful emojis. "Everything's fine here. Just very busy with Troy and the event. Can't wait for you to come home." It wasn't the words themselves, but the chill absence of emotion, the clipped tone that snagged at something deep within me. A veteran's instinct, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, the first faint whisper of a truth I wasn't yet ready to hear. The final leg of the journey home was a blur of cramped airplane cabins, stale recycled air, and the gnawing anticipation that gnaws at every soldier on their way back. After months of sand and sweat, the sheer greenness of the East Coast, even viewed from 30,000 feet, felt like an almost hallucinogenic dream. I had rehearsed the reunion 100 times in my head, the crush of Emily's arms, the scent of her hair, the easy laughter, the simple comfort of being home. It was the reward, the anchor, the reason you endured everything else. As I walked through the sliding glass doors of Fayetteville Regional Airport, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I scanned the waiting crowd. There she was, Emily, my Emily. She looked a little thinner, perhaps, a few new lines around her eyes, but still beautiful, still radiating that quiet strength I'd always admired. A smile touched my lips, genuine and unburdened for the first time in months. But something was off. Her smile, though present, seemed a touch too wide, a shade too forced. Her eyes, usually so quick to meet mine, flitted nervously, resting everywhere but on my face. When she finally saw me, her initial step forward faltered, as if she was hesitating. I closed the distance, my arms opening instinctively. She came into them, but her embrace felt stiff, like a choreographed movement. Her cheek, pressed against mine, felt cool, not warm with the anticipation I'd expected. I inhaled, hoping for her familiar scent, the subtle perfume she wore, the faint trace of lavender. Instead, there was a different, unfamiliar fragrance, light and masculine, lingering faintly on her clothes. I dismissed it as airport air, or maybe just my overactive senses, still on high alert. "James," she murmured, her voice a little breathless, a little too high-pitched. "You are home." "I'm home, Em," I replied, trying to imbue my voice with all the warmth I felt, trying to ignore the chill that had just settled in my gut. The drive back to our house, nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street just outside the base, was punctuated by a nervous chatter from Emily. She talked about the weather, about a new grocery store, about how busy she'd been with the family support group. It was all superficial, a flimsy veil over an unspoken tension. I tried to steer the conversation to us, to her, to anything of substance. But she skillfully dodged every attempt, redirecting back to mundane topics or inevitably to the program and Troy. "Troy's doing so well, James," she said, almost too brightly, as we turned onto our street. "He's become such an inspiration to everyone." I just nodded, my eyes on the familiar facade of our house. It looked the same. The trim needed painting, as always. The roses, her beloved roses, were blooming exuberantly. But as we pulled into the driveway, a sense of unease solidified into something heavier. The house felt different, like a stage set where the props had been subtly rearranged, but not by me, not by us, together. Inside, the feeling intensified. The air, usually thick with the comforting aroma of home, my pipe tobacco, Emily's baking, the lingering scent of old books, was instead crisp, almost sterile, with that same unfamiliar fragrance I'd noticed on her. There were fresh flowers on the coffee table, a vibrant bouquet of lilies that weren't Emily's usual choice, a new throw blanket draped over my armchair, the small, almost imperceptible shifts that only someone intimately familiar with a space would notice. They were insignificant details, really, but they screamed of a foreign presence. I tried to shake it off. I was tired, jet-lagged, my mind still wired for combat zones. It was just the shock of being back, the jarring transition from one world to another. I convinced myself that I was simply overly sensitive, projecting my own stress onto what should have been a joyous homecoming. Emily, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of activity, offering me food, asking if I needed anything to avoid a quiet moment. Her phone, which she kept close, buzzed frequently, and each time she'd snatch it up, quickly glance at the screen, and then dismiss it with a vague excuse. "Just the committee," she'd say, or one of the girls from the group. That night, lying in our bed, the space between us felt vast, cold. I reached for her, but she turned away slightly, murmuring something about being tired. My hand hovered, then dropped. The silence stretched, heavy and filled with unspoken words. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind, a battlefield strategist by profession, was already sifting through data, correlating observations, trying to find the anomaly, the pattern that was just out of reach. It was an instinct honed by decades of survival, and it was screaming at me now, telling me something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. The next few days were a masterclass in polite evasion and manufactured normalcy. Emily went through the motions of a loving wife, cooking meals, doing laundry, offering small gestures of affection that felt rehearsed, devoid of genuine warmth. Each interaction was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, but the actor's eyes betrayed a deeper, unscripted drama. The unfamiliar scent lingered in the house, a ghost I couldn't quite exorcise. And her phone remained her constant, secret companion, clutched almost protectively, its frequent vibrations a staccato rhythm of my growing unease. My combat training, usually a source of strength, now felt like a cruel advantage. I observed her with the detached, analytical gaze of a special forces operative tracking a target. I noted the way her gaze darted when I asked about her day, the slight tremor in her hands when her phone buzzed, the way she over-explained trivial details and avoided any mention of her evenings. She was building walls around herself, and I, her husband, was watching her construct them brick by painful brick. One morning, the humid Carolina heat already pressing down, I woke before Emily. The clock on the nightstand read 05:30. My body, still attuned to Afghanistan time zones, had been ready for reveille hours ago. I lay there for a moment, listening to the quiet breathing beside me, the soft chirping of birds outside. It was a domestic scene, perfectly ordinary, and utterly, terrifyingly wrong. Then her phone, charging on the bedside table, chimed softly. A text message. Not a call, not an email, but a text. Always the most intimate form of quick communication. My heart, which had been beating a steady, predictable rhythm, stuttered. It wasn't curiosity that drove me, not entirely. It was that primal, cold dread that clamps down on a soldier before an ambush. The knowledge that something devastating was about to unfold. I reached for it, my movements slow, deliberate, as if I were defusing an IED. My fingers, accustomed to the rough metal of a rifle, felt clumsy as they grazed the smooth screen. The screen lit up, a contact photo I didn't recognize. A man with a charming, slightly sheepish grin. Troy. And the message. My world, already cracked and straining, didn't just crumble. It imploded. Can't wait for tonight, my love. Miss you already. 11 words. Just 11 words. But they were a cannon volley, tearing through the carefully constructed facade of my life. Through 30 years of marriage. Through every sacrifice I had ever made. The very air seemed to drain from the room, leaving me gasping in a vacuum of betrayal. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My gaze, usually so sharp and analytical, was frozen on those words, rereading them, trying to find a loophole, a misunderstanding, a cruel joke. But there was none. My love. Miss you already. From T, it wasn't just the message. It was the context. It was the frantic phone calls, the evasive answers, the new scent, the flowers, the rearranged furniture. It was the years I'd spent in barren, hostile lands, fighting for a home that was being systematically dismantled while I was gone. A cold, steel certainty began to solidify in my chest, replacing the white-hot agony. It wasn't just an affair. This was something deeper, more insidious. The man who had sent that message was the hero my wife had been tirelessly working to rehabilitate, the brave sergeant who had lost his leg, the one she was so proud of helping. I carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand, my movements precise, mechanical. Emily stirred beside me, a soft sigh escaping her lips. I could have confronted her then. I could have screamed, wept, thrown things. That would have been the natural human reaction. But I wasn't just a man anymore. I was a weapon, honed by years of conflict, now turned inward. And weapons don't scream. They calculate. I slipped out of bed, dressed silently, and made my way to the kitchen. The coffee machine was humming, a small comfort in the suffocating silence. I poured myself a mug, the bitter aroma doing little to cut through the acrid taste in my mouth. As I stood by the window, staring out at the manicured lawn, the perfectly ordinary suburban street, a car drove past. It was a dark blue Ford F-150, lifted, with oversized tires. The kind of truck a younger man, perhaps a contractor, or someone with an active lifestyle, would drive. And then I saw him. The driver, his arm rested casually on the open window, a confident, almost arrogant smile playing on his lips as he glanced towards my house. It was Troy. His gaze met mine for a fleeting second. A flicker of surprise, then, unmistakable, a smirk, a look of triumph, of ownership. In that instant, the last fragile remnants of my old life shattered. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This wasn't just a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was an act of audacious, cynical desecration. My wife had not merely betrayed me while I risked my life. She had done it with a man whose very identity was an insult to everything I had devoted my life to. A man who looked at me, a decorated colonel, a veteran of countless tours, and smirked. The fury that ignited within me was not the wild, uncontrolled rage of a betrayed husband. It was something far colder, far more dangerous. It was the calm, calculated wrath of a soldier whose honor had been trampled, whose sanctuary had been defiled. The kind of wrath that doesn't burn out quickly, but smolders, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. I finished my coffee, the lukewarm liquid doing nothing to warm the ice in my veins. My mind, now fully engaged, began to process. Not with emotion, but with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a battle I could walk away from. This wasn't a conflict I could negotiate. This was war. And I, Colonel James Peterson, was about to go operational. The decision was made, not with a roar of fury, but with the quiet click of a safety being disengaged. Confrontation, tears, accusations, those were the tools of civilians. I was a soldier, and soldiers, particularly those of my particular vintage and training, operated with a different set of rules. You don't scream at an enemy in the field. You analyze, you plan, you neutralize. The enemy was no longer a distant insurgency. The enemy was in my living room, in my bed, in the very fabric of my presumed sanctuary. I spent the next few days in a fog of methodical observation. Emily, oblivious to the fact that her world had already shattered around her, continued her charade. I watched her, listened to her, dissecting her every word and gesture. Her lies, once subtle, now screamed at me. Her forced cheerfulness was brittle. Her attempts to engage me in conversation felt like diversions. I saw the relief in her eyes when I seemed to accept her excuses, the quiet satisfaction when she thought she had successfully navigated another minefield. It was sickening. But beneath the disgust, a different kind of analytical process was unfolding. I needed data. Just like in a tactical operation, you don't act on assumptions, you act on intelligence. I began to look for patterns, for evidence. Small things at first. A receipt for a dinner for two at a restaurant Emily never liked, tucked away in her purse. A strange appointment on her calendar, vaguely labeled therapy session, but at an odd location. A new brand of coffee in the pantry, strong and dark, not the mild blend Emily preferred. These were breadcrumbs, leading me deeper into the forest of her deception. The search for Troy began with the same surgical precision. My mind, trained for decades in intelligence gathering, was already sifting through the vague details Emily had provided. Sergeant Troy West. Lost a leg. Marine. Hero. These were keywords. I started with the most obvious and least invasive methods. I went online. My personal laptop, secure and untraceable, became my war room. I scoured military databases, public records, news archives, and veterans' forums. I typed Sergeant Troy West IED Afghanistan into every search engine imaginable. Nothing. Not a single official record of a Sergeant Troy West with a combat injury. No Purple Heart citations. No news articles about his bravery. No mention in any casualty reports from the periods Emily had vaguely referenced. It was unsettling. A genuine combat injury, especially one as severe as an amputation, would leave a digital footprint. Medals, rehabilitation programs, interviews, veteran support groups, these things generated records. Troy West was a ghost in the machine, a phantom. My unease deepened, transforming into a cold, hard suspicion. This wasn't just a clandestine affair. This was something far more twisted. My wife was not merely sleeping with another man, she was sleeping with a lie. And that lie, in its calculated disrespect, felt like a direct assault on every man and woman who had truly shed blood for this country. The first call I made was not to a lawyer, nor to a marriage counselor. It was to an old friend, Steve Marshall. Steve was like me, a career soldier, albeit one who'd hung up his uniform a few years ago. He de-served in intelligence, then transitioned seamlessly into a specialized consulting role that often involved, shall we say, discreet information gathering. Steve had connections, deep ones that could cut through bureaucracy like a hot knife through butter. "Steve-o," I said, my voice carefully modulated, trying to sound casual, catching up after a long deployment. "It's James. Heard you were back in civilian clothes, making a fortune, living the dream." "Peterson, you old dog!" Steve's voice boomed through the phone, full of genuine warmth. "Thought you'd gone native in Kandahar. Good to hear your voice, man. What can I do for the legendary Colonel Peterson? Besides buying you a drink, which I intend to do very soon." "That'd be great, Steve. Actually, I was hoping to pick your brain about something. A little professional courtesy. Just trying to get my bearings back stateside. Looking into some things that seem a little off with some of these new veteran programs." I kept it vague, knowing Steve would read between the lines. He always did. I heard some whispers about potential scams, and you know how I feel about people preying on our own. A pause. Then Steve's voice, now a shade lower, more serious. "Say no more, James. Name it. I'm listening. Always got a soft spot for sniffing out rats, especially when they're targeting vets. Send me what you got, whatever details you can share, and let's grab that drink. My treat." I mentally filed away Steve's offer, a crucial piece of my evolving strategy. The game was on. The investigation had officially begun. The quiet rage within me solidified into a grim determination. Troy West had not just stolen my wife's affection, he had dared to dishonor the sacrifice of countless others, to cheapen the very concept of heroism. And for that, he would pay a price far greater than any domestic dispute could exact. Steve Marshall was, and always had been, a man who understood unspoken language. He'd seen enough classified documents and covert operations to know that when a career officer like me, renowned for discretion, called with vague allusions to scams and new veteran programs, it meant the stakes were personal and the target was serious. We met 2 days later at a nondescript diner outside Fort Bragg, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the conversations could easily be lost amidst the clatter of plates and the drone of local chatter. He walked in, looking exactly as I remembered him, a little grayer, a bit heavier around the middle, but with the same sharp, observant eyes that missed nothing. He was wearing civilian clothes, a polo shirt and khakis, but the posture, the way he scanned the room, it still screamed, "Operator." "James," he said, extending a hand that was still surprisingly firm. "Good to see you out of the sandbox, brother." "You too, Steve," I replied, a genuine smile momentarily breaking through the ice I'd built around myself. It was good to see a familiar, trustworthy face. We talked for a good half hour about Afghanistan, about his new life in the private sector, about the mundane challenges of returning to civilian life. It was easy, comfortable conversation, a familiar rhythm of two men who understood the language of service and sacrifice. Then, I casually pivoted. "So, about those programs," I began, lowering my voice just a fraction. "My wife, Emily, she's been incredibly involved with a local support group, doing good work as always. But there's this individual. A Sergeant Troy West. Claims to be a Marine, lost a leg to an IED. The kind of story that rips your heart out, you know." Steve's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "I know the type. Been a few bad apples trying to cash in on valor, especially with the surge in veteran support initiatives. What's the flag?" "Well," I continued, leaning forward, "Emily's been working closely with him. Getting him grants, setting up speaking engagements, bringing him into circles where he can get a lot of attention, a lot of sympathy. She truly believes in him. But I've done some digging, personal, and his story just doesn't sit right. No official records, nothing concrete. It's almost too perfect." I laid out my sparse findings, the lack of military records, the absence from casualty lists, the almost too smooth narrative. I kept the personal aspect, the affair, carefully tucked away. Steve didn't need to know the depth of my wound, only the nature of the infection. Steve listened, his expression impassive, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "A phantom limb, a phantom service record," he mused, almost to himself. "It happens, James. More often than you'd think. These guys are good. They target communities that want to believe, communities that are eager to help." He paused, meeting my gaze. "And they often go after the ones with connections. Like your wife." "Exactly," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "He's not just preying on a system, he's preying on genuine goodwill. And if he's a fraud, he's desecrating the memory of every man and woman who truly sacrificed." Steve leaned back, a thoughtful look on his face. "All right, James. Give me his name, rank, unit, if he claims one, date of injury, whatever details Emily's shared. I'll tap into a few old contacts. We'll cross-reference everything. It won't take long to either confirm his story or expose it as a fabrication. You'll have an answer within 24 hours, maybe 48 at most. For now, act normal. Don't tip your hand." I nodded, grateful for his measured response. He didn't ask personal questions, didn't pry into the obvious emotional undercurrents. He simply understood the mission. Later that evening, the phone vibrated in my hand. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was Steve. Confirmed. No Sergeant Troy West matching description in any official database. No combat injuries reported. No record of service in USMC. He's a ghost. A very active one. We need to talk more. The words confirmed what I already knew, but hearing them, seeing them in black and white, was like a punch to the gut. Not just a lover, a fraud, a desecration. The cold certainty within me solidified into something unyielding, something dangerous. My wife, Emily, had not just betrayed me with another man. She had aligned herself with a parasite, a leech feeding off the honor and sacrifice of real heroes. This wasn't merely infidelity. This was a direct, calculated insult to everything I, Colonel James Peterson, had dedicated my life to. There was one more person I needed to see, someone who could confirm with absolute certainty whether Troy West's injury was real. Someone who spoke the language of bone, muscle, and trauma. Dr. Leonard Green, a grizzled Army surgeon, a veteran of countless operating theaters in some of the world's nastiest corners. He'd patched up more soldiers than he could count, including a few from my own units. He was blunt, unsentimental, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of combat injuries. I knew he was still attached to the base hospital, a steady anchor in a sea of changing faces. I arranged a casual meeting, a quick chat over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. I showed him one of the pictures Emily had sent. Troy standing proudly, leaning slightly on his prosthetic leg, a determined look on his face. Green took the phone, his eyes, usually tired, sharpening as he scrutinized the image. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just ran his thumb over the screen, zooming in, then out. "So what do you think, Doc?" I asked, my voice calm, almost casual. "And good rehabilitation work, huh? Emily's been very involved with him." He finally looked up, his gaze meeting mine. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a shared understanding that needed no words. He saw the ice in my own eyes, the controlled tension in my posture. "Good rehab," he scoffed, handing the phone back to me. "Peterson, this kid, was an actor, and a bad one at that. Look at the stance. Too stiff, too posed. The way he shifts his weight, the angle of the prosthetic. It's all wrong. A real amputee, especially one who's been through combat, moves with a different kind of grim fluidity. This guy is acting pain, not living it, and the leg itself looks like an off-the-shelf civilian model, not what we'd issue a combat veteran. My guess, he either bought it online or he rents it for these little performances." He paused, then added, a dry, bitter edge to his voice. "This hero of yours. He's a goddamn fraud, James. And the way he's carrying that leg, he's not just faking the injury. He's mocking every man and woman who ever stood on one of our tables." The words hit me not with shock, but with a grim confirmation. My wife was not merely sleeping with a liar. She was sleeping with a man who was actively, shamelessly, blasphemously insulting the very concept of heroism, the very sacrifice I had commanded, witnessed, and honored for decades. The contempt I felt for Troy West was now a cold, burning fire. He had chosen to desecrate the sacred, and I, Colonel James Peterson, was about to become his judge, jury, and executioner, not with bullets, but with truth. The doctor's words, "He's a goddamn fraud," echoed in the sterile air of the hospital cafeteria, then settled deep within me, cold and heavy as lead. It wasn't just a confirmation, it was an anointing. My personal wound of betrayal had now morphed into something far larger, a righteous indignation for all the genuine heroes Troy West so shamelessly impersonated. This wasn't about me anymore, not entirely. It was about honor, about duty, about the sanctity of sacrifice. My contempt for Troy West solidified into a lethal focus. He wasn't just a snake in my garden. He was a viper poisoning the wellspring of respect and gratitude for all veterans. He had not merely stolen my wife's affection. He had stolen dignity from the truly wounded, resources from the truly deserving. This wasn't a domestic squabble. This was a tactical problem, and I was going to solve it with the precision and ruthlessness of a seasoned operative. I returned home, maintaining the facade of the slightly bewildered, recently returned husband. Emily continued her dance of evasion and strained normalcy. I observed her with renewed clarity, now seeing her not just as a betrayer, but as a blind instrument in Troy's calculated scheme. Her loneliness, her craving for attention, these were weaknesses he had exploited, turning her into an unwitting accomplice. And that, in a twisted way, made her a casualty too. A different kind of casualty, but a casualty nonetheless. My mind began to construct the plan. It wouldn't be simple revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional, and often self-defeating. What I sought was justice. Justice that was public, undeniable, and utterly devastating to Troy West. It had to be so complete that his fraudulent existence would be irrevocably shattered, and he would never again be able to prey on the goodwill of others. And if possible, I needed to extract Emily from his orbit, not for reconciliation, but to prevent her from being implicated further in his criminal enterprises. The first phase was gathering incontrovertible evidence. Steve Marshall became my primary asset. His network of private investigators, former military intelligence contacts, and open-source data miners was vast. "I need everything on Troy West, Steve," I told him in a hushed phone call later that evening. "Every address, every bank account, every social media profile, every claim he's ever made for benefits, every charity event he's spoken at. I need his real name if Troy West isn't it. I need to know his past, his patterns, his victims. Leave no stone unturned, and I need it fast." Steve understood the urgency. "Consider it done, James. We'll deploy a full-spectrum collection. He won't know what hit him. This kind of fraud. It's like a cancer. It needs to be excised." Over the next few days, a steady stream of intelligence flowed into my secure email. The picture that emerged was even more repulsive than I had imagined. Troy West was indeed an alias. His real name was Trevor Jenkins, a career con artist with a rap sheet that included petty fraud, identity theft, and multiple instances of impersonating a military officer to defraud veterans organizations in other states. He'd honed his craft, learning the language, the mannerisms, the subtle cues that would fool unsuspecting civilians, especially those eager to believe in a hero. His amputation was a meticulously crafted illusion. Trevor had been in a motorcycle accident years ago, suffering a severe but not life-threatening leg injury that left him with a pronounced limp. He'd learned to exaggerate it, to use prosthetics to mimic an amputation, perfecting the heroic struggle walk. The money he'd scammed from various veterans' funds, from naive donors, from gullible women like Emily, was funneled into offshore accounts, funding a lavish lifestyle utterly at odds with his wounded warrior persona. He was a professional, a predator. I started to subtly drop conversational traps for Emily. "You know, Em," I'd say casually over dinner, "I was talking to Dr. Green today. He was mentioning how amazing medical science is these days. The new prosthetics, the way they integrate with the body. Almost impossible to tell sometimes." Emily would freeze for a split second, her eyes flicking to mine. Then she'd quickly regain her composure. "Oh, yes. Troy talks about that all the time. How revolutionary it is. He's just so grateful for all the support." Her voice would be a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic. Each time I'd feign interest, nod along, but inside, I was marking her reactions, gathering her tells. She was lying. Not just about the affair, but about him. She was protecting his lie, either willingly or out of deep, profound naivete. The distinction, at this point, was becoming increasingly blurred. The intelligence from Steve's team revealed something even more disturbing. Trevor Jenkins, aka Troy West, was preparing his biggest score yet. He was targeting a large national veterans charity, attempting to secure a massive grant for a fictitious, innovative rehabilitation project that he claimed to have developed. And to seal the deal, he was planning to leverage the very network of contacts Emily had so diligently built through her volunteer work. Influential donors, sympathetic politicians, high-ranking military officials. This wasn't just about my personal pain anymore. This was a national disgrace in the making. Trevor Jenkins was about to hit the jackpot, thanks to Emily's unwitting assistance, all while continuing his calculated mockery of the men and women I had led, cared for, and mourned. I knew I couldn't just call the authorities. These con artists were slippery, often able to wriggle out of charges with clever lawyers and plausible deniability. I needed something decisive, public, and utterly damning. I needed to ensure that Trevor Jenkins would not only face justice, but would be exposed in such a way that his ability to ever perpetrate such a fraud again would be utterly destroyed. And then the opportunity presented itself. Emily, still desperately trying to prove her worth to me, still clinging to the fiction of our marriage, proudly announced she was organizing a major charity gala. A night of heroes, she called it. The guest of honor, the keynote speaker, the face of the event, was to be none other than Sergeant Troy West. It was designed to raise significant funds for veterans, and also, implicitly, to give Troy a platform to solicit more personal donations. It was perfect. A stage, an audience, and a predator about to step into a meticulously crafted trap. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of grim, unwavering resolve. The hunt was almost over. The Night of Heroes Gala was Emily's magnum opus, held in the grand ballroom of a prestigious hotel in downtown Raleigh. It was designed to be a glittering spectacle of patriotism and philanthropy. High-ranking officers from Fort Bragg, local politicians, wealthy donors, and prominent members of the community were all on the guest list. Emily, in her element, flitted through the preparations with a nervous energy, her enthusiasm barely masking the stress. She genuinely believed in the cause, and in Troy, which only deepened the bitter irony. My role was to be the supportive husband, the stoic colonel home from war, proud of his wife, his dedication. I played the part to perfection. I complimented her dress, her tireless efforts, the stunning floral arrangements. Every word felt like ash in my mouth, but I kept my poker face. This was the final approach, and any deviation could alert the target. I had already set the pieces in motion. Steve Marshall, along with two of his most trusted private investigators, would be present, disguised as event photographers and security personnel. They carried not just cameras, but concealed recording devices. The evidence package, Trevor Jenkins's real identity, his criminal record, detailed reports from Dr. Green, sworn affidavits from previous victims in other states, financial records of his offshore accounts, and photographic proof of his able-bodied status, was meticulously organized, notarized, and ready to be deployed. I had also made contact with Mr. O'Connor, the manager of the local Veterans Affairs office. He was a man of quiet integrity, known for his no-nonsense approach to ensuring veterans received their due. I had met him under the guise of discussing new programs for returning soldiers, but had carefully, subtly planted seeds of doubt about certain individuals who might be exploiting the system. I didn't name Troy, but I described the modus operandi with such precision that O'Connor's professional alarm bells were already ringing. I knew he would be there, observing, waiting. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was awash in soft light, the air thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Emily, radiant in a sapphire gown, greeted guests, her hand often resting proprietarily on Troy West's arm. He looked every inch the wounded hero, impeccable tuxedo, a carefully polished prosthetic leg, a slightly melancholic yet charming smile. He moved with a practiced limp, the subtle hesitation in his step designed to evoke sympathy. He was a master performer, and the audience, primed to adore him, was eating it up. I watched him from across the room, my hands clasped behind my back, my expression unreadable. He was working the room, shaking hands, sharing anecdotes that sounded tragically authentic. He was a parasite, elegantly dressed, charming his way into the hearts and wallets of unsuspecting patriots. The sight fueled the cold fire within me. The program began. Speeches from local dignitaries, a moving tribute to fallen soldiers, a musical performance. Emily, beaming, introduced Troy West to the podium. "And now," she announced, her voice ringing with pride, "it is my distinct honor to introduce a true American hero, a man whose courage in the face of adversity inspires us all, Sergeant Troy West." A ripple of applause, then a standing ovation. Troy, with a humble nod, made his way to the microphone, his movements deliberately slow, eliciting gasps of sympathy. He adjusted the mic, a practiced, almost theatrical gesture. "Thank you, Emily," he began, his voice raspy, seemingly overcome with emotion. "Thank you all. It's an honor to be here, among so many who care deeply for our servicemen and women. Every day I wake up and I remember the faces of my brothers, the sacrifices we made, the leg I left behind in the sands of Kandahar." His voice broke slightly, perfectly timed. A few women in the audience dabbed at their eyes. He was building his narrative, drawing them in, preparing them for the pitch. My blood ran cold. This was it. Just as he was about to launch into his prepared speech, a subtle shift occurred. The stage lights, momentarily, flickered. A hushed murmur went through the crowd. Then, the spotlight, instead of remaining on Troy, abruptly swung to the side of the stage. And there I was. Colonel James Peterson, dressed in my full-dress uniform, crisp and authoritative, medals gleaming on my chest. I hadn't planned to wear it, but Steve had suggested it. "Authority carries weight, James, especially when you are delivering bad news." I walked towards the podium, my stride measured, unwavering. Every eye in the room followed me. Troy, caught off guard, stared, his charming smile slowly fading into a look of confusion. Then, a dawning realization. Emily, in the front row, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew then. She saw the steel in my eyes, the grim set of my jaw. I reached the podium and, without a word, gently but firmly took the microphone from Troy's hand. He stumbled back slightly, his face now a mask of bewildered panic. The crowd was silent, a palpable tension filling the ballroom. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used to address troops before a perilous mission. Colonel James Peterson, United States Army, retired. A few murmurs of recognition from the military personnel in the audience. I let my gaze sweep across the room, meeting the eyes of Mr. O'Connor, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then, my eyes locked on Troy. "Sergeant West," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You speak eloquently of sacrifice, of your leg left behind in Kandahar, of your brothers in arms, a truly moving story." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Troy shifted uneasily, trying to regain his composure, his eyes darting frantically towards the exits. "The only problem, Sergeant West," I continued, my voice hardening, "is that there's no record of a Sergeant Troy West serving in the United States Marine Corps in Kandahar, or anywhere else for that matter, because Sergeant Troy West doesn't exist." A collective gasp swept through the audience. Emily, in the front row, cried out, a small, heartbroken sound. "This man," I declared, my voice now ringing with authority, "whose real name is Trevor Jenkins, is not a wounded veteran. He is a con artist, a serial impersonator, a parasite who has spent years preying on the very generosity you all embody, stealing resources and respect from real heroes." I nodded to Steve, who, along with his team, stepped forward, producing large, mounted photographs. One was a mugshot of a younger Trevor Jenkins. Another was a photo of him, taken covertly just a week ago, casually walking down a street, without his prosthetic leg, a full, able-bodied stride. He was laughing, looking completely at ease. Dr. Leonard Green, a respected Army surgeon, has examined photographs and videos of Mr. Jenkins's injury, I stated, gesturing to the doctor, who stood stoically to the side. He confirms that Mr. Jenkins's so-called amputation is a fabrication, a theatrical performance designed to deceive. I continued, methodically dismantling his entire fabricated identity, layer by layer. I presented documented evidence of his previous frauds, his criminal record, his illicit bank accounts. Each word was a nail in his coffin. Troy, his face pale and sweating, finally snapped. "This is a lie!" he shrieked, his charming facade completely gone, revealing the cornered rat beneath. "He's just a jealous old man. Emily, tell them it's not true." All eyes swung to Emily. She looked utterly broken, her face streaked with tears, shaking her head slowly, unable to speak. The weight of her own complicity, her own devastating misjudgment, had finally crashed down on her. "No, Mr. Jenkins," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "The only lie here is you, and your reign of deceit ends tonight." Just then, Mr. O'Connor, along with two plainclothes officers, moved forward, approaching Troy. "Trevor Jenkins," O'Connor stated, his voice official. "We have a warrant for your arrest, for multiple counts of fraud and impersonating a military officer. You have the right to remain silent." Troy, seeing the game was truly up, made a desperate lunge for the exit. But Steve's security detail, anticipating the move, swiftly intercepted him, bringing him down with practiced efficiency. The scene erupted in a controlled chaos of gasps, angry shouts, and the flashing of cameras. Emily, overwhelmed by the complete and utter demolition of her reality, crumpled to the floor, fainting amidst the stunned silence that followed Troy's arrest. I watched her fall, a profound emptiness in my chest. I had saved her, in a way, from further entanglement with a criminal. But I hadn't saved us. That battle had been lost long ago. The flashbulbs continued to pop, capturing the scene. The disgraced con artist being led away. The unconscious wife, and the grim-faced colonel standing alone on stage, a silent sentinel of shattered honor and unyielding justice. The Night of Heroes had indeed become a night of revelation, and for Trevor Jenkins, it was the night his meticulously crafted illusion finally, spectacularly, died. The aftermath of the Night of Heroes was a maelstrom of media frenzy and legal proceedings. Trevor Jenkins, exposed in such a public and undeniable manner, found his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. The news of a prominent wounded warrior being a serial imposter spread like wildfire, fueling outrage and prompting investigations into other similar frauds across the country. My decision to go public, to use the glare of the spotlight as a weapon, had paid off. Jenkins was a pariah, his reputation irrevocably destroyed. Emily was rushed to a local hospital. When I visited her the next morning, she was pale, withdrawn, her eyes swollen from weeping. There was no anger from me, no recrimination, just a quiet, chilling calm. The fury had burned out, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape. "Emily," I said, sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptics filling the air. "We need to talk, not about blame, not about anger, just about facts." She flinched, pulling the thin hospital blanket tighter around herself. "James, I didn't know. I swear, he seemed so genuine, so hurt. He was so convincing." Her voice was a raw whisper, thick with shame and a desperate plea for understanding. "I know," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of warmth. "He's good at what he does. He preys on empathy, on good intentions, and he preyed on yours." I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw the fear, the humiliation, the profound sense of betrayal now reflected in her own eyes. But I also saw the years of simmering resentment, the quiet loneliness she had tried to fill with volunteer work, with the adulation of others. I saw the vulnerability that Trevor Jenkins had so expertly exploited. "But Emily," I continued, my voice now steel, "you allowed yourself to be blind. You disregarded every warning sign. You chose to believe the narrative that served you, the one that gave you purpose, attention, excitement, even when it contradicted the very values we built our lives on. You offered him access to people who genuinely wanted to help veterans, enabling him to commit even greater fraud. And in doing so, you desecrated my honor, my service, and the memory of every real soldier I ever knew." Her eyes welled up again. "I was so lonely, James. You were always gone, always overseas. I needed to feel needed, to feel seen." Her words were a faint echo of justification, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I listened, not with sympathy, but with the detached analysis of a battlefield report. Her loneliness was real, her pain perhaps genuine, but it did not absolve her. It explained, but it did not excuse. "That doesn't change what happened," I stated, my gaze unwavering. "Our marriage, Emily, was built on trust, on shared values, on the understanding that while I was out there, fighting for our country, you would protect our home, our honor. You violated that trust, not just with infidelity, but by aligning yourself with a man who mocked everything I sacrificed for. A man who embodied a profound disrespect for the very institution that defined my life." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the sterile quiet. "I will ensure that you face no legal repercussions for your unwitting involvement with Jenkins. I've already spoken with the authorities. Your cooperation in his prosecution will ensure that. But as for us, There is nothing left to save. She crumpled, her body racked with sobs. No, James. Please. It's over, Emily, I said, rising from the bed. My voice was final, devoid of argument. The damage is too deep. The foundation is gone. I filed for divorce this morning. I left the hospital, the scent of antiseptics clinging to my uniform and the taste of bitter ashes in my mouth. The end of my marriage wasn't a victory. It was an amputation. A clean cut, necessary to stop the spread of infection, but leaving behind a profound, phantom ache. Trevor Jenkins's trial was swift and merciless. With the overwhelming evidence I and Steve's team had gathered, along with the damning testimony from Dr. Green, Mr. O'Connor, and his previous victims, he had no defense. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, impersonation, and grand theft. The judge, clearly incensed by his calculated desecration of military service, handed down a lengthy prison sentence, ensuring he would not be preying on anyone else for a very long time. His case became a national cautionary tale, forcing veterans organizations to tighten their vetting processes and shining a harsh light on the issue of stolen valor. My military career, already nearing its natural conclusion, felt suddenly untenable. How could I command men, lead them into battle, when my own home front had collapsed under the weight of such a cynical lie? The honor I cherished, the principles I lived by, demanded a fresh start. I submitted my retirement papers. The farewell ceremony was muted, respectful, but inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure, of turning a very long, painful page. The divorce was finalized quietly, efficiently. Emily faded from my life, retreating into her family, her name now irrevocably linked, in the whispers of the community, to the scandal of Sergeant West. I never saw her again. I didn't just walk away from the army, though. I walked towards something new. The pain, the anger, the profound sense of betrayal. I didn't let them consume me. Instead, I channeled them. Using my retirement funds, my extensive network of contacts, and Steve Marshall as continued assistance, I founded a national nonprofit organization. Its mission was simple: to rigorously vet veteran support programs, to expose fraudsters like Trevor Jenkins, and to ensure that every dollar, every ounce of compassion went to the real heroes. To those who truly bore the scars, both visible and invisible. My office now is not a sandbagged outpost in Afghanistan, nor a sterile hospital room. It's a bustling hub of activity, filled with dedicated people, genuine veterans, and the quiet hum of purpose. On my desk, amidst the reports and strategic plans, sits a photograph. It's an old one, of me in uniform, standing proud. Next to it, there's another, an older wedding photo of Emily and me. But the faces are gone, cut out, leaving only the empty outline of what once was. It's a stark reminder. I often look at it and think back to those 11 words, the ones that started it all, the words that blew up my world, stripped away my illusions, and forced me to confront a darkness I never expected to find at home. They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds, like phantom pains, stay with you forever. They don't let you forget. And perhaps that's for the best, because it's those very pains that remind you what's worth fighting for, and what you must never allow to be desecrated again.